So in this video, I wanted to briefly talk about this pen, and this is called a Yookers, Yookers. I'd never heard about this before a few months ago, and I started seeing them appearing on eBay and Amazon a bit, a few other places. And what it is, it's a kind of a rollerball style pen, so like a capped pen that uses fountain pen refills, but the writing tip is actually a felt tip style, sort of like a Sharpie pen or like a pigment, like a Sakura Pigma type pen, like a fine liner type thing. And like I said, it uses standard international short refills. So it's kind of a strange animal. Fountain pen ink, felt tip or fine liner, whatever you want to call it. Kind of use case was more like a fine liner or a roller ball. So I picked it up. It cost about maybe $12, $13 off eBay. And I wanted to talk briefly about it just because I've been using it for a little while now, and I had never, I wasn't sure how popular they are, if people really knew about them. So again, Yookers, it's sold in, this one's a 0.8, which I thought would be really good for day-to-day stuff. It's also sold in a 1.2, 1.0, 1.2, and I believe 1.4 millimeter sizes. So there's a pretty good range. I thought 0.8 would be good, and we'll see a little bit about that in a second. From a build quality standpoint, this thing is really lightweight and doesn't feel nice when you hold it. It's all really light plastic. As soon as you touch it, like it doesn't feel like it's made of a nice resin. It just feels like it's a cheap plastic. And you could kind of probably get a feel for that just by the fact that you could sort of see through the plastic. You could probably see that the cartridge in there. And so it's just a really lightweight plastic. It's not like a nice resin from a fountain pen. It's not even as nice as some of the cheaper pens from Uniball and Pilot. It's just very lightweight. The body itself, or the barrel, has nothing on it. It's just a thin, light piece of plastic, no logo, anything like that. And that's kind of sort of how the pen is. It's sort of very budget feeling. But when you look at the pen company online, they seem like this kind of cool pen company you never heard of before. So I guess the feel of the pen is not in keeping with the sort of vibe of the brand. They do have a higher end metal version, which goes for something like $40, but I haven't used it. But based on this one, I definitely would not invest. There you see the Yookers logo. It's sort of like missing part of the O's, I guess. I don't know what that's supposed to be, but it just looks odd. It looks like the printing didn't work. Metal clip. Clip is fine. It's one of those ones that has sort of sharp edges, and it sort of hurts when you do this, but you don't really have to pull it up too much. And then a little metal finial type piece. It does have a sort of a blind cap in there, which you are dealing with fountain pen ink. So you want something to keep it from getting too dry. Here is that nib piece. We can see if we could focus in on it. So you have just kind of really cheap looking plastic here. You could see the seam. Threading is plastic, and then standard international refill. It came with one that really was not very good, so I replaced it with I believe a Schneider black fountain pen ink. This is the 0.8 millimeter refill, and you can see that tip. It's called a felt tip, but most modern felt tip style fine liners don't actually use a felt tip. They use a piece of porous plastic, which lasts a lot longer. On the downside is that it doesn't feel that nice to write with. It doesn't have that sort of felt tip softness. Instead, it's really hard, just with its plastic. Again, it lasts a whole lot longer than those old felt tips. So it's a trade-off there. So that's really it from the body. It's just a lightweight plastic. I don't really find it to be very satisfying to look at or even to hold. The grip is, sorry about that. The grip is just some lines on the plastic. It's very simple. It's fine to use, but nothing to write home about. And then again, it's nice that it clearly says 0.8. It would have been cool to have it somewhere else on the pen, but I guess technically you could switch this piece with another Yookers body, and then it might not be something you want printed on the cap. From a writing experience, I haven't been hugely impressed with this one because it writes really lightly. From a 0.8 millimeter rollerball or a fine liner, you would think it would have a pretty good tip size and putting down a fair amount of ink, but this one writes pretty light. It's kind of like what I would call maybe a medium. So I would have been nice to get the 1.0 or even the 1.2 millimeter. I was just expecting this to be just a really broad, sort of a juicy type pen. And I really have not found that to be the case. Like it's fine day to day, but you're writing on a piece of plastic that doesn't really have any real give or character to it. And then the amount of ink it puts down is sufficient for day-to-day note-taking, but it's less than I expected. Again, that's probably my own fault. I should have just gotten the 1.0 millimeter or the 1.2. But when you're writing like this, you could see that it does not put a lot of ink down. So while this is more expensive than a normal fine liner, presumably because it's refillable, you're not getting as good a writing experience as you would from a nicer fine liner. And I've just found that it is just a little bit light a lot of the time. In fact, I threw out the cartridge that came with this, the black cartridge that came with this, pretty early on because I thought, oh wow, this black ink is just too light for me. It looks like a dark gray, which I find to be really annoying. But what it is just that the Yookers tip, that plastic tip, just does not put down a lot of ink. So this nice black is just not as saturated as I would like. So here's the same black, for example, coming out of a fountain pen ink. And this is a medium fountain pen nib. So ignore the line thickness, which is obviously outside of the, I guess, control of the Yookers, was of what size I bought. But just look how saturated that color is. And that has to do with how the fountain pen nib puts the ink down. The Yookers nib is not putting down a lot of ink, as in it's not very wide, but also the ink flow is very limited. Like you could have this in a 1.2, but it might look like a very light line like this one, sort of that gray, just in a wider size. I think this plastic tip, whatever it is, this plastic writing tip is just not letting a lot of the ink through. And it ends up having a very light writing experience that makes my really dark, a true black ink look sort of gray, which I find to be just a little annoying. The writing tip, it's hard to explain over the video, but it has a sort of hardness to it, and I haven't wanted to push too hard on it because I feel like that would just break the pen, which would be a waste. But I have been trying to give it a little bit of push to see it would let more ink out, and it seems like it doesn't really want to go. So I think that is kind of how it is, and I'll keep using it. But to me, the sort of writing experience with this Yookers has been a little bit disappointing. So I think everyone watching this, or at some point, you'll figure out that I really love the idea of a rollerball type pen that uses fountain pen ink. So I was excited to pick up a fine liner pen that uses fountain pen ink. But this is not the fine liner that uses fountain pen ink that I've been looking for. I think it was a good idea, but I just don't think the writing tip is up to the task. And that probably has to do with the fact that if more ink was coming out, it would have a chance of leaking as this got older. So it's a really delicate balance. The same with a rollerball that uses fountain pen ink. As that ball gets older and older, it lets out a little bit more ink, but inevitably it starts to leak. And leaking is the worst case scenario for a pen like this. So while I really like the idea, and I'm glad a company took a stab at it, I really have not been very happy with the results. So for $13, $14, I would say this is not a pen I would recommend. I would go ahead and skip this one, but I don't really have any good recommendations for you except to maybe pick up a I like the J Airbeam roller ball, which is a refillable or cartridge roller ball. Again, not a fine liner, but you get the sort of nice day-to-day writing experience using a ball type tip, a very easy to use tip, but you could also use fountain pen ink. So that's it. Thanks for watching.